Welcome to the Cincinnati Public Schools. We call it Finance Committee, but technically what it is the Budget, Finance, and Growth Committee. We have with us a number of members of the administration as well as guests from the folks that are going to be sharing some information with us. And we also have members Bates, who is virtual, and we have member Messer and myself, member Bolton. And it would be great if we can get started because it's a very heavy agenda, but actually can go quite quickly, I think. So if we can get started, we'll ask the treasurer to introduce our first spokesperson and longtime partner. Big mind and partner.
Yeah, I'd like to introduce to you Brenda Weimer. She is bond counsel and advisor and partner, and she's here to help talk about possible change in an escrow agreement because of the new agreement with the city on tax abatements.
Thank you,
Treasurer. To Brenda. He's got to hit this little button here. Oh, there you go.
Thank you. Good evening. It's nice to be here again and see everybody. As Jennifer said, I'm here to talk about an escrow agreement, but what the escrow agreement relates to are the compensation payments that the school district receives from the county and the city in exchange for certain tax abatements and other incentives that those entities provide. And back before the district started its major capital improvement project, these agreements were entered into with the county and the city. And then bonds were issued in various series along the way to fund the capital improvements. The county agreement is still in existence, although it has been amended a couple of times since its inception. The city agreement that was entered into back in '99 has terminated, and a new agreement has been entered into for the next several years. And that is sort of important, as Jennifer said, because that impacts the escrow agreement. When certain series of bonds were issued that were supported by the compensation payments that you are receiving from the county and the city, the district, Hamilton County, and formerly the Provident Bank entered into an escrow deposit agreement whereby the county would send its payments directly to the bank for deposit into this escrow account to be used to pay debt service on certain bonds. The city also instructed the school district, also instructed the city by virtue of a letter of instructions and language in the original agreement to send payments due under that agreement directly to the escrow trustee. Since the city agreement from 1999 has terminated, the city is no longer sending those payments to the escrow trustee, and they're sending them directly to the school district, which is fine for the reason we're going to talk about in a minute. The specific bonds that were issued pursuant to this escrow deposit agreement, the types of bonds that were issued that required they be supported by the compensation payments, are maturing this December. The final payment on those bonds that were issued under these specific provisions will mature and be paid off in December. Therefore, by the terms of the escrow agreement, it will also terminate in December. The bank will return any accumulated funds in that account to the district and will close out those accounts. So the district needs to send a letter to Hamilton County, which we have drafted, and I'll provide to Kevin and Jen for review. You need to send a letter to Hamilton County instructing them to stop making payments to the escrow trustee since that agreement is going to terminate in December. so that, and instruct them to now make those compensation payments directly to the district. Additionally, for accounting purposes, because those payments were pledged to the bonds and because they were being deposited in an escrow account, they were coded for accounting purposes as being deposited into a bond retirement fund. Since those specific bonds will be paid off in December, future receipts of compensation payments from the city and the county should be deposited into the general fund instead of into a bond retirement fund. Has been the intent of the school district to use those compensation payments to make the lease payments on various certificates of participation debt obligations that have also been issued throughout the years to pay for other capital projects in conjunction with the master plan. So those monies will still be used to make certain debt payments, but because of the way that the Ohio Revised Code distinguishes lease payments and debt payments, we no longer want to deposit those into a bond retirement fund that can only be used technically to make payments on state debt bond obligations and not lease purchase obligations. The compensation payments can be used to make the lease purchase payments through the general fund. So we just wanted to bring to the finance committee and the board's attention that this escrow agreement is ending in December. Your final payments on those specific bonds will be made in December, and that we need to send instruction to the county to stop making their payments into that fund. And then the district needs to start recording those deposits into the general fund. They'll still be available to make the lease purchase payments on your outstanding COP. You just need to start accounting for them differently. And the memo that Jen and Kevin passed out lays that all out for you to go back and look at. But as we're approaching the end of the year, we wanted to get this in front of you so that you're prepared to make the necessary adjustments internally on your accounting system, as well as contacting the county. The city payments are automatically now being paid to you because that 99 agreement has terminated. So we don't need to contact the city separately, just the county, who is still abiding by the escrow agreement. And they may or may not be aware that it's going to terminate this year.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Does Treasurer Wagner have anything to add and help interpret for us?
Well, my only question for Brenda is, does this need formal board action, send a letter, and move the COPS from the debt service fund into the general fund?
You don't need formal board approval to send a letter to the county. It's an administrative action because the agreement is ending. The movement of the deposit of the funds should be part of the budget process. So you would take that, not necessarily as a separate item, but in conjunction with other budget items.
So when we get ready to do that, we will ask the board to adopt a new appropriations resolution to reflect that movement.
The change?
Yeah.
Thank you. And hopefully, I know Ms. Bruckner is listening, and that will be part of the minutes and advise also the president. Thank you. Mr. Messer, any questions? Or Mrs. Bates, any questions? I'm impressed if you have any questions. I think this was pretty technical, and that's why we have Ms. Weimer to help us and guide us through a number of these issues. Anybody else have any comments or questions? Or Brenda, is there anything else you'd like to add to make sure we get it right?
Now, I will leave a draft copy of the letter with Jennifer and Kevin, and I will also provide it to them tomorrow afternoon electronically so that they have it in a Word system if they want to send me any comments or edits on that. And then when we get that finalized, we'll send another electronic version that they can put on district letterhead and get out to the county.
And also for your, David Conley, our financial advisor, has been involved in all of our meetings and conversations. He'll be with us today.
Great. That was going to be my last question before I say thank you to Brenda. And again, always glad that you're here advising us. We really appreciate it because you always are watching out for us. Appreciate
Happy
it.
to help.
Great. Thank you so much. Rob, do we have anyone from preschool? Okay, there was the only thing I think they had to maybe report was a follow-up regarding half-day, full-day that either Mr. Messer or Mrs. Bates had raised in a previous meeting. So we'll reach out to them maybe for next month. Or if they join us, please give us a cue that they've joined us. Thanks, Rob. So let's move then to Treasurer Wagner with a budget update, as well as a number of other folks within her bailiwick, if you will.
Sure. So, Rob, can you pull my PowerPoint up, please? That's pretty good. There you go. So as an annual review process, as we kick off the new budget development cycle, I just wanted to explain to the board, to the public, or to Finance Committee, to the public, our process. And so if you go ahead and flip to the next slide, our budget building initiative is actually called for in the strategic plan, where we're required to develop a process that equitably distributes financial resources to our students and staff. Next slide. So because we're on a June year-end, fiscal year-end, and we have to have we're supposed to have an adopted budget by June 30 of every year, we start in the fall with our student enrollment and projections. By December, we will have the school-based staff settled and out into the schools for them to review. And then after the holidays, we'll start working on the non-personnel side of that. There are many avenues in which the budget gets built. Go ahead, next slide. I'm calling these our pillars. So starting with the left-hand side, we begin with what we call our fixed costs or non-variable. So the things don't fluctuate with the student enrollment, like our debt payments, our audit fees, the Fund 34 transfer into our maintenance fund that we have to do, bank fees. Those things don't fluctuate with student enrollment. And so we're teasing all that data out. Next to that is the pillar that describes our strategic initiatives. So we're in the third year of our strategic plan. We have the new SHORE, which is kind of an extension of our strategic plan. And then also Ed Steps is kind of the educational side of that that's being filed with ODE. And that's guiding all of our investments to support the vital few measures. And when we get into more public presentations, we'll go into a little bit more detail on that. The third pillar, if you recall, we have a 3-year ESSER grant, and there's a cliff at the end of that 3 years. But to prepare for that cliff, we're going to start phasing some of the things that are in ESSER back into the general fund, starting with the fiscal year 23 budget cycle. And so we're working through those details. The blue pillar represents this new equitable way of distributing, building our school budgets and central office as well. And it's a tiered system. We're in the process of defining what our tiers are, but we're looking at our investments based on what every student should have, what every school should have, what every employee should have as base, and then supplemental on top of that. And I have a slide that goes into that, a little bit more detail on that. The last pillar on the right are things that have come up that are new things. Like, so they weren't in the strategic plan, they weren't under new SHORE, but they're new ideas or new needs. One example of that is the audit committee suggested we start a risk assessment operation, probably through a vendor contract initially, but instead of creating a whole new office. But that's one example. And then at the budget retreat, we had a recommendation we need to start building a new strategic plan. So we'll have to fund that effort, right? So those are things that are kind of new. And so we're trying to keep that, keep track of those as we start building the budget. Go ahead. So here's the tiers. We're following the multi-tiered system of support that Ms. Bunty has educated me on the academic side of the house. and she helped me to understand it through an ice cream cone. So tier 1 is the base service where every student in this district should receive, a teacher, for example, right? Tier 2 is where groups of students have specific needs, similar to a career tech classroom might have some specialized equipment or software that the other students don't need. And then the tier 3 are highly individualized services, are students with disabilities, ELL, gifted, and even an employee who might need some assistive technology. And then we added tier 0, which is the fixed cost. So we're covering all of our bases there. We are in the process, we've broken up into teams, and we're defining every budget line item as to what tier it fits into and coming up with common definitions. So this is fun work that we've been doing lately. Okay, next slide. So the timeline, these are high-level timelines, but for the schools, they're going to be receiving their student projections later next week. So Jeremy's almost done with them. We're going to look at them on Tuesday, and then we'll ship them out to the schools. They're going to review them. Meanwhile, we're going to take those projections and feed them into all the staffing formulas, and we will be sharing and sending out this base staffing to the schools by November 29th so that they can return their feedback to us by December 10th. The new collective bargaining agreement requires us to have staffing into the buildings by mid-December, so we're even further forward with that. And then, like I said, after the holidays, we'll focus on the non-personnel items. Next slide shows the central office administrative timeline. Currently, the budget managers are filling out their PGSMs. If you recall, that's a tool, priorities, goals, measures, and strategies. Priorities, strategies, measures, and goals. And that's based on all those pillars that we talked about, which are board directives and board priorities. And so we're going to be reviewing those. And then after the holidays, we'll start consolidating information, prioritizing some of those investments. So what will PLT be doing between now and then? Next slide. Student projections, like I said before, we just finished reviewing the base staffing formulas, comparing it to national standards and our current practice and collective bargaining agreements. Working on the budget initiative. So if we have an initiative, what's the scope for the fiscal year of 23? And that's being collected to the PGSMs. And then next, we're going to start working on the vendor contracts and determining, number one, does it still make sense to outsource this work, or is it better to insource it? And if so, how will we measure our investment and our success? And does it support the vital few? And so that'll be our next activity when we get back together for a full day. Next slide. We also have new budget software. So we started an RFP. There were 20 people on the team reviewed. They picked a software called AlloView. The beauty of this software is that it was actually built by K-12 people for K-12 industry. OpenGov that we were trying to use and all the other tools that I've had exposure to are written for governmental agencies, and they just don't do things the way school districts do them. This software was built specifically for K-12, and so we're kicking that off. And we will be able to track our spend based on the initiatives that we identify. So I'm excited about that. Next slide. Bringing it all home. We operate in like 3 years at the same time. So we're in the current year. We're building the blue cycle so that we can by June have an adopted budget. And right now we're going through a cycle of community engagement. We're hoping some of that engagement, that feedback will be able to help us kick off a new strategic plan cycle. So I'm thinking we could, after the new board sits, after 60 days, we may be able to start planning that budget cycle, the strategic plan cycle, and have it finished by the end of the summer so that we can then start using it when we kick off the next budget cycle for fiscal year 24. So we don't have a gap in funding. Otherwise, we'd have to wait another year, right? So it's complicated, but we'll get there. Given whatever we come up with and what our revenue sources are. So that concludes this high level thing. And as we get further along in the process, I'll still be doing public engagement on progress and get feedback. Questions?
Thank you. Mr. Messer, question?
Not really a question, but I love how this is evolving from when I first joined the board of, it was a lot of finance and accounting.
Yeah.
And, and I remember being in the community and they say, oh my gosh, you have this much money. I can't believe that. And we talked about, well, there's a big chunk of that just salaries, keeping our buildings open. The actual dollars is not what people see, that is and I think this does a really good job of categorizing it. So you're not talking about hypothetically all this money just to keep our lights on. We're just down to this little portion. And I love how that shows not only that separation, but then as there are new things coming that's being called out, that obviously means something over here has to change. There's no money dropping in, unless we get some additional parcels, maybe. But I think it is a really good process in that it helps the layperson who's not in finance. And you can be in finance and just not even understand school funding. That's a whole other thing that you need at least 2 terms probably to figure out. And I would argue to say, you probably need more than that to really become an expert in school funding without having to call your lifeline. So I just commend you for making it manageable for me as a parent, and others like me in the community who care, so we can actually talk factually about the schools and how we're funded and how we're frankly still not funded appropriately, even with the dollars that one might see.
Thank you, Mr. Messer. Mrs. Bates, any questions, comments?
No, I'm good. That was a very good presentation. So I like the ice cream cone. You got me there.
We are a visual board and have been for quite some time. I appreciate the development of this and the probable and possible transparency of it, both internally and externally. I think that's critical. Just a couple of questions on, we're conducting engagement now as we, face the superintendent search effort and pretty extensive community engagement. It would be important for public affairs to be able to share that to help jumpstart if there is going to be a new strategic plan. I think that makes sense. I also hope in the budgetary process, and this I think pertains to the superintendent as well, the number of our buildings and the amount of enrollment and the actual capacity, the initial capacity for each building, because it may be some sort. I know we've done it before, so I don't think it's a new thing, but at least on paper, it looks as though we're under enrolled in a number of places, and we may be, but also that does not necessarily measure in or weigh in all of the other things that are going on in the buildings that do take up square footage. And I think we have to find a way to communicate that. We have to find a way, if we're under enrolled somewhere, by golly, we got to fix that. But we also have to find a way on paper that people could understand that square footage of our buildings. People may not know how, special services are really begin to fill the square footage, or our wonderful school-based health centers. So again, building by building, it would probably behoove us to be able to explain perhaps the difference between the enrollment and the capacity, if there is a difference, and begin to address that. I know General Counsel's not worried about that 60% piece, and I'm deciding not to worry about it now either, but I do worry about the message about capacity versus enrollment, because we are talking about growth. And if indeed it looks like, there's 27 elementaries that look like they could fill, another however many kids. And I don't think people fully appreciate the impact that preschool has had, since we've really tried to, eliminate the preschool deserts. We have, thank goodness, absorbed that. So I do think there's a facility communication piece that really should be developed, and actually maybe will happen as a part of the budget, as well as describing what we may mean by growth. So I appreciate I appreciate your work and PLT's and everybody's work on the budget process as we move more towards transparency. Anybody have any other comments or questions? Superintendent, are you good? All right, great. Thank you, Treasurer Wagner. Appreciate it.
Welcome. And I'd like to pass the baton to Mr. Ashley, who's going to do the highlights on our financial reporting. So Rob, you can pull Kevin's PowerPoint up. Thank you.
Welcome, Kevin.
Thank you. I'll actually skip to slide 3 once you have it up there, which is a cash balance encumbrance report for the general fund. There you go. So one of the things to highlight here is the cash balance at the end of September, which is 205.1 million. As you probably know, we get a lot of our tax revenue with the August settlement and the February settlement. So if you look at the trend line, we tend to have higher balances at those times, and then we spend those down in between. We'll go to the next slide. This is just a high-level revenue comparison, and I know that's kind of small to see. One of the things just wanted to point out here, it looks as if the trend of our revenue is down. However, we are on track given that the state funding change has taken away revenue as a result of the elimination of the pass-through funding. So as you look at that, you'll see that our revenues came down. Our expenditures for those tuition payments also went down. So our net impact is a positive, but we wanted to highlight that here that we really do feel like we're on track given those factors. The next slide just gives a little bit of breakdown on the revenue, and you'll see the green slice is where we went from about 51 to 31 in foundation. And so that accounts for that piece of the difference. The next slide is expenditures. This is kind of high level. The lighter blue are the actual expenditures. Again, those tuition deductions are no longer reflected in the current year. ODE is doing, they will be providing all the detail for the new formula, and we're kind of waiting on that to be finalized. They had said October. We're still waiting at this point. But once that comes, we'll have a better, it'll be easier, I think, to work through those numbers. And so we plan to do that once we get that finalized. I do expect that there'll also be an adjustment up. We'll kind of see that extra money annualized out through the rest of the payments that we get. So just kind of wanted to highlight that. The next slide is one that we started last year, trying to determine the portion of the budget that's unallocated. The bigger green slices are really the budget that is set aside for future salary and benefits to be paid throughout the year, as well as transfers that'll go to school-wide pool, to the debt service fund, and the classroom maintenance fund. So just as again, you can't see the footnote there, but our unallocated this year at this point is about 9%. It was a little bit higher last year, about 20%. So I think we've kind of, right, that was a big piece of that. Couple slides will be school-wide pool. The next slide is, we're seeing a little bit higher expenditures this year versus last. A big part of that is the collective bargaining agreement and the effects that that has, as well as some supply expenses. The next slide is the unallocated calculation for school-wide pool. At this point, because that big green slice is salary and benefits to be paid out through the remainder of the year, or at least budgeted to be paid out, the unallocated is only about 2% of the total budget, and last year it was around 2.8. Next is the slides that I usually include relating to tuition assistance. On the next slide, for the month of September, there were 770 students who were calculated to receive tuition assistance, and that calculates out to 513,000. Correct, from the preschool levy funds. So fiscal year to date, the 753 is what has been attributed and charged back to those funds, versus last year we were at 400,000, obviously with COVID related issues. And last year at this point, the student number receiving tuition assistance was about 564. The total enrollment, the adjusted total enrollment at the end of September for preschool was 1,713. So just to give you a perspective there. The next slide is showing the budget to actuals for the preschool expansion. And you'll see just to highlight there, the revenues, which includes the tax revenues since July is 7.4 million. At this point last year was 7.2. Again, those tuition assistance numbers are reflected. United Way payments, the agreement calls for us to make quarterly payments. However, if there's an underspend by CPP, then that offsets our payment. That's the way they've agreed. There's an agreement to do it that way.
So in Monday night's treasurer's report, you'll see the annual adoption or request to make the schedule of United Way payments. We didn't have to make one for the first quarter because they had so much money underspent last year. So we'll be making it on November 1st is the first payment.
And so I think those are the key changes. If you have any questions.
Appreciate all the documents too that will be posted, and I really appreciate too kind of the analysis by showing the highlights. It lets us focus a little bit more on all of that. Do Member Bates or Member Messer have any questions? Mr. Messer.
Thank you. Thank you for that very thorough presentation. Again, making it so that us non-finance people can understand and follow along. So thank you for that. And then the comparative commentary was very helpful in understanding. But that led to one of my questions. I did, of course, never want to see those dollars being shared outside of public school kids. And the pass through, it was just it was like a shot to the heart also as a salesperson, trying to get that bigger share of our market, some more income and all that stuff. Now that it's not, I feel like it's not front, top of mind because we could actually see what was going out. And so, it would still be interesting to see how much money we're losing through the dollars that were passed through, and how that amount compares to the previous years. Because I think we lost a bigger part of that during the pandemic. We had some students that went to other places that then we were giving up those dollars. Sure sounds like we're getting many of those kids back and then some. But are their numbers also growing, or are those going down? So how can we keep track of that competitive? I just see that opportunity dollars, so that we can then build plans to identify that as possible revenue in the future.
Well, their foundation payment reports are public just like ours are, so we could look them up. Their foundation payments are public just like ours are, so we could look them up and track them. But having said that, the House Bill 110 increased the voucher payments very significantly for the Ed Choice voucher students. But we had planned on doing presenting an analysis when we get the final state formulas. We'll share that information as an analysis.
Great. I think that'd be very important for the public to hear that your tax dollars technically, in part, not going to your public schools, which that is a shocker to everybody I have that conversation with. They don't understand that piece as well. Obviously, I didn't either really until joining the board, and then was sick at the dollars that were at opportunity. So thank you for that. And then just these are two small questions on early childhood, not that we have to answer here. I still have questions Number one, so the issue of being able to pay with a credit card, is that still coming? Because I do think that's so helpful for people not to have to walk in with $800 cash, or go to the bank and then get a money order and all that stuff. And then second, I have to say, after you make that initial payment, which cannot be done through the system that's set up, so your initial deposit has to be the cash or whatever. Is there a notification? Like, I've never gotten an email or anything that says, like, your bill, like, this is what's due this month. So, and I haven't quite figured out, I've looked through every email we've gotten. So not that that's necessarily an early childhood. Is it a finance function that people, regardless of the amount that you're paid, that once a month there could be an email to say, hey, it's time for your payment? Because as you're looking at early childhood, I thought, oh my gosh, I don't think I got billed for last month. We did deposit, but probably not for the month of September. So how is that communicated to the end user?
All the tuition billing for early childhood is handled in the early childhood department. And so have other tuition or fee related activities. But as we built up the software on Business Plus, individual departments can use that to do the billing and statements, send out statements and stuff like that. We just haven't gotten early childhood on board with that yet, but we can certainly. And we are in the process of trying to get the credit card thing up. It's not as simple as people might think it is. COVID kind of paused us, and then change in staff paused us, but there's a lot of fraud considerations to work through, and so we're working with a bank to get that up and running, at least piloted this year and then rolled out next year. Mm-hmm.
Mrs. Bates? All right, thumbs
Yay.
up, like the Roman emperor. I'll tell you, that's great. I have just a comment and maybe a suggestion too. We think of ourselves in a marketplace, and in a very competitive marketplace. And going back a decade or more, part of that competition is certainly we're all, whether it's parochial or charter or CPS or private schools, we're all competing for our kids that live in the district. And I know early on the charters were really having some great success, and for a long time the parochials have done a remarkable job in that competition. And then with the FMP and with all kinds of efforts that CPS has made, we started to watch the charters schools lose enrollment, or at first hold it at where it was and then start to lose it. COVID had an impact that I think, since the charters were in person and many times we were not, they came back up. And we all know that in the last year and a half, 2 years, charter companies from whether it's Texas or California or wherever have been purchasing property both in Madisonville and on the west side, and actually feed us to one of those purchases. I think it might be very important. I think that's talking to folks around the state. That's in the post-COVID, that seems to be a trend. And I would hope that we would be monitoring that charter growth or lack of it, because as you've taught us, and as Mr. Messer kind of referenced, the charter enrollment really hurts us greatly because of the I think, is it the per student amount, or could you explain why it is has a negative financial impact, as well as the fact that we want those kids back because we believe this is the best place for their instruction?
So under the old formula, we would get an average of about $3,800 per student funding CPS student residents, and they would deduct off on a charter school the average about $7,400, $7,500, because they take the weighting with them and the local share. So net, it would hurt us financially because they were not only just taking the state funding, but the local share with them. Under the new formula, we are only funded for the students that we are educating in our district, including open enrollment students. They're considered our kids now. So the way that it would hurt us now under the formula is if the state budget, the amount available to the K-12 public school districts, is reduced because they're increasing the funding in those other areas. So it would be at the state level, not necessarily in the individual district level. But we still haven't seen any financial reports from ODE to really verify some of that information. And so we're anxiously awaiting.
Thank you. Any other questions? Empress of Kelly Island? No? Okay. Then we're, Superintendent, any comments or questions? Great, thank you. Thank you. Introduce your next.
Ms. Grenblondai, our grants manager.
Pie chart that we can pull up.
You might need to get a little bit closer to your mic with the mask on.
Do we have the state and federal grants pie chart that we can pull up? So trying a different approach this month, instead of sharing the spreadsheet that has all of the individual grants, which is a lot of information. I think that's really great. Not sure about the presentation of it. So switching to pie charts for the first time this month. So,
But we'll still get that really cool
yes, it should
spreadsheet
be
one, but you know I love it.
It's in
But
your
you're
packet.
right, you're right to go to pie chart.
right, it's great information. Put it in your packet so you
Great,
can still
thank
have
you.
the individual.
Rob, are you able to bring up her pie chart?
We don't have it?
Do you have the ESSER? So there was two. One was a pie chart and then one was a graph. Okay.
Maybe talk about it and I'll just share everyone copies with them. And then we'll make sure everybody gets copies. This is the first chart she's talking about.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's a good chart.
So the pie chart is representative of the state and federal grants, the percent that has been spent. So our goal is a 20% spend goal for September, and we have 31 grants, and they total 54 million. And of those 31 grants, 8 did meet the spend goal. And so this is also just the public portion, not the non-public portion. And then there was also a graph chart of our ESSER spending, just to show that separately as to not skew the normal grant funds that we receive. So the bar chart had the total allocation available for the 3-year period for the ESSER grants, and then also the fiscal year 22 budget. So the total allocation is 324 million. And then the turquoise represents the budget for fiscal year 22, which is 126 million. And then the purple represents the expenditures to date from the inception of the funds, and that's 78 million. And then the brownish, darker red one represents the fiscal year 22 expenditures to date, and that amount is 57 million. And I was so excited to share these charts. I'm sorry you guys don't have them.
Do we have them somewhere that?
Can you guys share them? Oh, can you share them so I can see them?
I don't have a laptop with me.
No, I do. I think.
There you go. There you go.
She's taking a picture, but I'm sorry that didn't get to where it needed to get.
My
If you have-
apologies, maybe I did it.
No,
follow
it's
proper
no, it's
protocol.
fine. Just right. They're coming, Melanie. And if you have them, what's the usual process, Jen? Is it to send it to the board or?
Yes, well, so all the documents get sent to Naima and now Allie, and so it could just be newness, but they
Okay.
typically send them and post them into board docs. But I always, as a second thing, send my documents directly to Rob. So we'll make that as a process where we make sure we send it to 2 places so we don't have this happen again.
It's okay.
Oh, it must have been a mistake. Okay.
Thank you.
Are they on board docs?
Are they what? The intent was to put them there, but we think we sent the wrong document electronically. So,
Okay, thanks.
You should have them in your text right now.
okay, this big thing. Yeah, okay.
Okay, well, I love that one anyway, so, but these are, this does immediately communicate what you want to communicate, so I think that's very, very helpful.
Thank you. Thank you.
So we'll get it on board docs and available, and it'll be part of our minutes for the public as well. That's great. Thank
Okay.
you.
And then Ms. Hughes is going to talk about the CRAs.
And she is virtual, right? There she
There
is.
she is.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
So there are 7 CRAs that we've submitted for your review today. Of the 7, 1 is an 8-year agreement, and the renovation is going to be a building that's going to be renovated into 6 one-bedroom, one-bathroom units. The other 6 are combinations. The respective agreements are ranging between 12 to 15 years. And the buildings are going to be renovated to either retail space, commercial offices, bar/restaurant spaces, residential or apartments. So the last 6, as you can see, they're a combination of the different renovations. Do you have any questions?
Members have any
I
questions?
do.
Mrs.
I
Bates?
do. Yeah, I mean, I recall that the city was going to at least consider moving the abatements to closer to maybe 8 to 10 years, but it seems like they're continuing with these extended abatements. What is your recall on that? And was there any decision made by the city to do that? Why are these 14, 15 years and not, as discussed, the shorter ones? Some of them are obviously, but not all of them.
Well, I'm not familiar with, go ahead.
I'm sorry, Kim. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I'm not familiar with that conversation, but I can most certainly follow up to see why they're being extended beyond the 8 to 10 years that was originally agreed upon.
And I'm not sure how formal that agreement was, but it certainly was a strong consideration. So yeah, if we could follow up and find out why they're persisting at the 14 to 15 years.
Is this when the agreement switched over from the 25% to the 33%? Is that when they decided, or is that when they said they were going to decrease it? Do you recall?
That was when this conversation was held.
Okay.
But evidently it wasn't formalized if they're persisting with the 14, 15, but I believe it's worth an inquiry.
Okay. I will definitely follow up with the city.
Yeah, Ms. Bates, I think you're right. That was part of the stew, if you will, that was getting stirred. And keep in mind with our new agreement, and once again, we thank people that helped us get to that new agreement. It really hasn't taken full effect yet, or I should take it back. I think it finally took effect because we had a bunch of holdovers from the previous agreement that still had to get through. Mm-hmm. I think an additional inquiry is some sort of monitoring of things that are not for restaurants, not for one-bedroom apartments, but I would like to start to see the volume from the city and us monitoring it when it's at least a 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom, because that's bringing families in, that's bringing children in, that's bringing enrollment in. And it'd be great to kind of keep monitoring that. Wouldn't even be bad to kind of after this election is over, because goodness knows, everybody's very preoccupied with housing and everything else, wouldn't be a bad idea, perhaps, if it pleases Mr. Messer and Mrs. Bates, if there's some sort of, I don't know, committee to committee or administration to administration, just to see where we are on the new arrangement that we have, as well as a lot of the new regulations and rules that are taking place in council regarding the abatement issues, and especially as it pertains to housing. But also keep in mind, and general counsel's aware of it, as is, I think, the superintendent, that there are also different ways that people are getting around our arrangement and agreement that we have with the city. I can think of especially a complex in Northside. The developer actually told the community meeting how he was going to avoid paying what we were deserving. So it might not be a bad idea to touch base. I would prefer administration to administration rather than committee to committee yet, but I think it's been a year or so, so I think it's time to check in. So I appreciate the comment. Mr. Messer.
Thank you. Now this is a topic I feel like I know way more than I ever did before, getting knee deep in it. And, you know, I fully agree with Ms. Bates. Ms. Bolton. Well, Ms. Bates, in her initial questions, Ms. Bolton's approach of probably should get a little bit more connected after this, because we got a whole new cast, probably, or at least a lot of new people. And, you know, I had a gentleman call me who also sent an email to the board, and it was a really heartfelt message saying, you know, I support our schools, our kids go to the schools. With the evaluation increase on the price of my house, I'm getting priced out of the very place that I live. And he was told by a city councilman, well, if you want to fix this, you've got to go to the school board. Well, wait a minute, Mr. Councilman. You're giving abatements away like Halloween candy. All you have to do is ask. Maybe you have to have the right costume on or whatever. I don't know, but not everybody gets them. Some people do. But, you know, that really made me think about, like, why would a council person say, well, if you want to fix this, go to the school board. That's where your dollars go. When they're giving up money that would offset what our taxpayers would be paying. So at the very least, I think we get into administration, and, you know, I won't be here, but I think it would be a good practice annually to have the development director, the city manager, come and present and say, what are your development priorities for the years ahead? And how are you making decisions on what's funded? If it's to increase families, if it's increase whatever, then projects should look like this. I think to Ms. Bolton's point, the one bedrooms, I mean, we got whole families living in one bedroom that need a better option. So I think some public transparency, and I think almost we should publish to our constituents how much money is being lost and being made up by average everyday taxpayers because of these abatements, and have it published and ongoing. It's this growing number. These are the dollars that are being given away by City Hall, not by the school board. So don't send them here, because those decisions are being made downtown. And I think it's another layer of transparency, and especially important for us at such time that we've got another levy and people are feeling like, well, if I vote on that, well, if I don't vote on it, maybe I can stay in my house. When another way to solve it is to be more diligent and intentional with the abatements that are given throughout the city. And I remember having a very specific conversation with Member Mann about when we were in that discussion, and he very specifically said, I don't know why the abatements are in your mind as it relates to what's happening with the schools. These are separate things. And that told me I think we have different understandings, because it's all one pot. You know, some of our fixed sum levies, so it's got to be made up somewhere, so that goes out to the taxpayers if it's not coming out of here. So anyway, long story is, I think it would behoove us to be very transparent as these are aggregated over time and just communicate publicly. Here's what we're losing and for how long. I think that would be staggering for people. And then also to ask that development director and or city manager, whoever, to annually present, like, just help us understand. I have no idea what decision criteria they use. There was a lot of suspect that, and people who are publicly saying they were being brought in and asked for certain things before they would get it approved. We want that all out. It needs to be based on some criteria that we all care about just as citizens, but for us as the school board to know how we answer to these dollars on that subject to our constituents.
I would agree with Mr. Messer and also Ms. Bates. I think too that over the last several years, whether it was the FC arrangement or whether it was the new agreement that was that replaced the previous agreement, or whether it's campaigns now about affordable housing, I think the most positive thing that's happened about the abatement piece is the basically the abatement, if you will, tax incentive committee that was citywide, that was co-chaired by Vice Mayor Smitherman and Carol Gibbs from Mount Auburn. And just to review some of their recommendations, even to see how the city is incorporated or not incorporated any of those. But there was great consideration about the school district losing money and not being held at harm's way. So I think this is right for us to talk and be with. And we do have some champions at the city for us, but I think we do need more interaction for sure and more monitoring. Thank you. Thanks, Kim.
My pleasure.
That's it. We good? All right. Does that take care of your folks? All right. Now we have transportation. And I think we may have already dealt with the growth piece, but we'll get there. But transportation is next.
Hello, thank you for having us here. I'm going to share with you an analysis that we've done since the last meeting that particularly pertains to 7th and 8th grade. What my staff and Mr. Palmer have done is spend a great deal of time looking over routing software. Sorry, next slide. Routing software and Excel tables. And they would use this to identify possible routes for K-8 non-public schools to link to potential CPS 7th and 8th grade routes. What they had to consider were the start times and dismissal times, and that had to be in sync to allow for time to effectively transport students on each tier. The routing software and Excel tables were also used to identify possible CPS elementary schools, elementary routes to link potential CPS 7th and 8th grade routes there. The same criteria was used. Next slide, please. They continued the analysis by linking a first tier potential 7th and 8th grade route with the second tier 7th and 8th grade route. The first tier high school start time had to be early with the second tier high school start time, and to link with the second tier high school start time. The schools needed to be in close proximity to each other to limit travel time required to start the next link route. Vendors have identified a max capacity for increased new service to students on yellow buses for grades 7th and 8th. This eliminated small enrollment high schools such as Spencer. This also eliminated the possibility of large enrollment high schools such as Walnut Hills High School. Walnut Hills High School alone would require 20 buses to implement this change. After careful consideration and lots of studying, we recommend a pilot for January through June of 2021. Next slide, please. For the pilot, potential 7th and 8th grade pilot, we would like to consider Clark and Schroeder. The criteria was enrollment size and location. Pilot would require the use of 10 new buses, and the current vendor that we would use would be UTS. This UTS is the only vendor that's able to meet pilot requirements. The driver shortage is impacting vendors' ability to provide additional service. First Student offered 10 to 15 buses, but currently they don't have drivers in the pipeline to be ready for such a endeavor as for January.
So,
Next slide, please.
oh, yeah.
Thanks.
So we wanted to share with you in all transparency, the current on-time performance for our yellow bus vendors. And, as you can see, year to date, UTS, their on-time performance, in other words, getting kids to school on time, is only 71% of the time. And the reason why we wanted to share that with you is because if we were to go with the pilot and put 2 more schools onto UTS, more than likely our calls into the call centers will increase from families because of the on-time performance being at 71%. Recently, they've increased a little bit, but it's still not great. Love to see it at least 90% minimum, if not 95%. So that would be one of the issues. Next slide, please, Robert. Thank you. So our consultant, along with our team in transportation, looked at what it would cost for these 2 schools. So for UTS, that would mean $460 per day per bus, times 10 buses would be at $4,600. And if we look at the 90 days in second semester, that would cost us less than $500,000, $414,000. So UTS is interested in the business, and they've already committed to make sure that they have the buses, that the people are trained properly to be able to drive our students and to start first day of school in January after the winter holiday. So there's some other considerations that go into this potential pilot. For example, we have to identify yellow bus eligibility areas for grades 7 and 8. As you know, not all kids would be eligible within a school building. It depends on where they live. And then thinking, can students actually use 2 types of services, both yellow bus and metro? And which leads into the next bullet about trying to avoid funding 2 types of services. So where does this come in? This would be like students who stay after school for extracurricular activities. Right now, they get a Metro card, and then they can use the Metro card to go home after school closes. If we put them on a yellow bus, there would be no yellow bus service for their after-school activities. So the question would be, do they get a ride home from, a parent, or would those kids only be given a Metro pass? And then we want to look at the geographical attendance boundaries to make this work. So what would be a reasonable attendance area for transportation? Because if we have to transport kids from one end of the city to another, that would not, we would not be able to accommodate that. So for example, a Schroeder student would have to ride the Metro if he was going, if he or she resides in South Park. So that's all we have to present. Do you have any questions for us?
Mr. Messer?
Thank you for that. Part of my interest in this topic early on was, I was trying to just keep track of the messages as they came in on families who expressed concern. And there was definitely, as I was calculating, at least the ones that I got, there were a lot of concerns I would have. But like a seventh grader, I think is very different than a ninth grader. So I would think about my daughter Lillian. Would I put her by herself, seventh grade? And I just had a question mark. So if I have a question mark, then I understand that for parents who are expressing that, and it looked like the majority that I was getting were in that younger age bucket because they just weren't used to it previously, and for the reason I just expressed. And so I wonder, so I think this is a great potential pilot. I think one step to maybe do, because I think there are some puts and takes, as you call out here, is, and you're probably already thinking about this, but kind of at this planning stage, identify the list of families who would qualify and survey them. We're exploring alternative options for families with seventh and eighth graders. We'd like to get your input on a few scenarios. Obviously, with all the variables, there are some things that you can do better and maybe some flexibility we lose. And if it was available, would you use it? Or have the ones who started writing say, it's not that bad. I had concerns, and my cousin's like, my daughter is in New York going to Chelsea from Brooklyn every day. You get kind of used to it. So he was trying to help me see, like, you might, when she is that age, decide. So maybe that some have gotten that way, like my cousin. And maybe they're like, actually, it turned out okay. Or they may say, oh, no, I'd take that in a heartbeat. And then you could say, well, if you selected, I would take the yellow bus. Are you okay if it loses the opportunity for picking up for extracurricular activities? So I think a quick little survey to get a pulse of what percentage would take advantage of the pilot could then give another green light in the process that now we have something we think our audience would actually utilize. Because I think maybe more are comfortable. I haven't gotten clearly as many as I had been getting. But at the same time, maybe they feel like, hey, well, there's not any options. If we put the option, I'd be very curious to what these families would choose.
Mrs. Bates?
Yeah, I have a question. Like, it was mentioned that it was impractical to bus the seventh and eighth graders at Spencer. Why can't we put them on the routes with the 4th through 6th graders? And especially where that's possible, and the same, for some of the other schools that have elementary, like SCPA and Riverview. Euler may be more neighborhood based, but why can't they be on the routes with the younger kids if they're in the school also?
Spencer kids are already on the yellow bus circuit with third grade through whatever grade level they're. Right. They're already on the yellow bus circuit.
Oh, I thought I saw on the.
But we were using an example of a small school like Spencer wouldn't, be one of the ones we would choose for the pilot. Probably should have used.
Oh, but you wouldn't need a pilot. You wouldn't need a pilot because they're already on the yellow buses. Okay.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, that makes sense.
Why would we be doing a pilot?
We were just kind of trying to come up with ideas to support the need that the parents early in the year were really not happy with Metro. A lot of the parent complaints that we were receiving dealt with 7th and 8th grade children on Metro. So we were just trying to come up with an idea of how can we best serve that population of parents who were very unhappy.
Completely agree, and I'm very appreciative of us trying to do that. I do think that is part of the ultimate solution. Frankly, whether it's this year or next year, a pilot or a full effort, that the reality probably let me preface what I'm going to say. This is another example of how Metro has damaged us and damaged our families, damaged our kids. because now it's impacting the yellow bus service, because we really are having to look at the stability that a well-functioning yellow bus system, which we have not had for a number of years for any number of reasons, is a better, more stable kind of approach and maybe safer for younger students. Although if you have little people on the yellow bus, they're not unhappy that the 7th and 8th graders aren't on the bus. Let's just be real, because they can be pretty scary too.
That's true.
So, I mean, again, this whole transportation, and I heard it again and again last night in the community meeting, transportation thing is hurting us, and there's just no good reason for us to be operating like this, except somebody's done something to us. With the RFP that you all have had to contemplate, and we held you all up for beginning last year too, is the RFP for Yellow Bus for the following years for the new contracts? Are we saying, hey, we're going to put K8 on Yellow Bus?
We have not gotten that far in the
Okay,
process.
I'm just
We haven't.
suggesting. So that might be it. Are we dealing with what we have had in the previously dedicated bus service or buses that are specifically for our field trips and for our athletics?
We still have those available.
Those are available, so that's part of it too. And then the Metro piece, I'm sure we're not done talking to Metro and also demanding certain things for our students. But the Metro piece, it seems like the 7th and 8th graders, let's say next year they're on Yellow Bus. That's what would happen. And then Metro, there are examples supposedly where some of our students on Metro don't have any transfer at all. They get on the bus and they're there. And I don't hear the complaint necessarily about that. What I hear more is the multiple transfers, the tardiness of arrival, so that their instructional people don't even know when to start the class because you've got kids coming in and out. You know, that's just, I've heard from Mrs. Bates the issue of the safety piece, that part of this fall climate that we have right now of violence, the situation with our busing is not helping it, because we have many students that we can't account for. So, I mean, I think as you guys look at the RFP, I think we have to have at least some outline of what Metro might look like on our demand, whether it's full routes or some sort of package deal or different things coming together. But I'm just not sure if I think of a pilot as we'd learn something. I don't know what we'd learn. I mean, but I don't want to discourage it, because I think the board would like to see that. I'm not sure what we would be learning, and I'm more interested in the RFP than I am about anything, because that's got to get done. And Metro's not going to be able to continue to not serve us in this way. I think the community will not allow that to happen to a publicly subsidized company.
Yes, if I can just add, we only pursued this because of it's a reaction, right? And we don't know if it will help right now. So thank you, Mr. Messer, in regards to, we need to go back to the family and say, is this truly a viable option? So we would go ahead and do that. Ms. Solano is currently working on a timeline for RFP, because if we open it up for more grades, we have to let them know ahead of time, because that's more drivers and more buses. So we will present that to the board as well. And then we can move quickly in regards to the RFP. But we want to write an RFP where it's flexible enough that we can continue to do what we're doing, open it up, but timing is important to give those vendors enough time to get the bus drivers and the buses they need to accommodate if we add more grades.
I certainly would agree with that, and I think that in the short term, it's hard for me to imagine that that's going to happen. But again, looking into the longer future, that could possibly happen. Also, the work that the administration did with was it the cropper? Is that the maps?
Yes.
What would also help, and again, visual learning, as we've referenced several times today, is those cropper maps school by school. If indeed we knew, and I think Mr. Messer raised this the last time we met, where you have some dots that are way across the town, are those faculty children? Or are they also that are attending because their mom or their dad is a teacher, which makes perfect sense. The more the merrier of that. But it gives us kind of a false read. But the other one is of our special, and this goes back to the growth piece and the vacancy, if you will, or the square footage. We have distributed all over our district special education units. Mm-hmm. And some of that, I'm believing some of those dots that represent students are those units. And that's a completely different issue than that these people are choosing to attend there. I mean, they've been assigned there or whatever. It'd be great to be able to differentiate to get a clearer picture. Mm-hmm. And I guess we used last year did we use COVID year for those dots it was our most recent year, but it might have been at our lowest in enrollment. But I think it'd be great in future planning to also see this eligibility piece versus lack of eligibility, because then you would really know who's within walking distance. And that's all part of the whole Vision Zero piece. And I just think there's so many, as I think Ryan and Melanie have both mentioned, there's so many parts of this that would help us make a really good decision here and there about the future. So those are some considerations. Well, I appreciate you taking action about the 7th and 8th grade, and I guess reaching out to families is a good start. But boy, we'd like to also see those maps with that differentiation to really know who's choosing and who's being assigned and why. Because some of it's just, it's inexplicable. It's completely inexplicable. Yes, Ms. Solano. Mm-hmm.
So the survey, are you suggesting we survey all parents of 7th and 8th or just for the 2 schools that we want to pilot?
Mr. Messer, your suggestion?
Yeah, I would do it just with those parents and be clear that it is a pilot. And before we roll this out, your schools have been identified, because then you don't want, somebody else, well, I didn't get the survey, to really make it clear in there that, a pilot is being considered, and 2 of the options that are being considered are one of them is your school. We'd like to get your feedback. So I think a way that you can serve that up would make sure they know it is truly a pilot, so we avoid some of the.
And I would also recommend that you talk to building administration, because that's going to affect arrival and dismissal and the use of staff, to have 2 separate arrival and dismissal procedures.
Two things we always forget about is the variety of, we think of programming because we're in education, but just the grade bands of our schools, how many PK8s, how many PK6, how many K6, all those can really impact what transportation you're giving. And a lot of those maps that you all provided us really do show a significant number of our neighborhood schools really are neighborhood schools, and those kids are living in close proximity. So it'd even be good to even figure out how many people actually have to take the bus, whether it's yellow or metro. So keep up the good work. We want to closely follow the RFP, and I think as a finance committee and certainly as a board. And the fight goes on with metro. Any other comments on transportation?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. The only reason I have growth on there was that I wanted to legally be able to raise that issue, square footage and enrollment. So, if anybody, I think it's very, very important for us to get a grasp of that, because that can help us figure out what the future might look like. But, did anybody else have any growth issues that they needed to bring to the table today? Are there any other agenda items? Emperors? We good? Okay. All right. I love it. And we're good. I think that's concluding then. If there's no other business, and I'm not even going to listen for any other business because we want to go home. Thank you. Great meeting. Appreciate your work and service.